Hello, and welcome to Galactic Terrors. I'm
Hello,
Jim
everybody.
Chambers.
I'm Carol Geisander. I'm talking right over Jim. That's not good.
That's okay. No, that's what good co-hosts do. But we are here once again to present an evening of dark fiction readings, live coming to you from authors tonight only scattered around the tri-state area, although in the past we have featured authors from around the globe. And we're very excited to introduce tonight C.W. Briar, Loretta H. Campbell, Oliver Baer, and Hildy SIlverman, all of whom will be reading from their fiction and talking with us and taking some questions and hopefully giving some answers.
Yes, and they are fiction writers, so they may make them up as they go along. We'll see.
Those are the best kind of answers.
Mm-hmm.
So if I seem a little bit loopy tonight, it's only because I'm pulling my hair out and going on minimal sleep while we do the final preparations for the Horror Writers Association's annual convention, StokerCon. So StokerCon 2021 is coming up next week. I'm going to do a little brief plug. What do they say? A word from our sponsors. StokerCon 2021, virtual event, May 20th to the 23rd. It will be taking place online on a platform called Hopin, and there's still plenty of time to register if you want to come by and hang out online with a whole bunch of horror authors. And one of the benefits of it being virtual is that we have authors coming in from around the world. We're already packing in tons of programming that will be available on demand during the dates of the con, including something upwards of 80 author readings, which is really impressive. I think most of the time at a convention, you might get about 50 or 60 authors readings, maybe 40, depending on time. So we really are offering, if author readings are your thing, that's going to be a great feature. It will also include the Final Frame short film horror competition, which will be exclusively screened only during StokerCon, and lots of other cool stuff. Great programming. Guests of honor are Joe Lansdale, Sylvia Moreno-Garcia, Lisa Morton, Steve Rasnick-Tem, Maurice Brodus, and Seanan McGuire. So it promises to be a good time. And I, at this point, am looking forward to the sleep that will come afterward.
Yeah. Well, you, Jim, and Brian Matthews have been doing such a tremendous job doing this with the support of so many other people from HWA. And, I can't say thank you enough, because I have an idea how many details go into it. And you have more presentations this year than you even do when they're live, which is just amazing. It's just amazing. So, well.
Yeah, we have some amazing stuff going on. Brian, I see, is with us tonight. He's just thrown up this really cool statistic.
Ooh, cool.
400 attendees from 13 countries. That's amazing. Yes.
There's a couple other things that I think are really cool about it. The Hopin platform is interesting too, because for one thing, you can attend panels and listen and get some great information and learn stuff. But there's also a couple opportunities to network with each other. So there's like the Lovecraft bar and such like that. So people can go in and chat with each other, which is one of the things that we really like about conventions that you miss a lot in the virtual age. So it's going to be a great opportunity to just, hang out and chat for a little bit with folks.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of social aspect to it, which is nice. That's why we went with that platform.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, but that should be great. And because I am a glutton for punishment, or don't know how to say no, or whatever the case may be, we have another event coming up in early June that will feature some of the members of the Horror Writers Association New York chapter. Carol, do you want to tell us about that one?
Yes, we've done readings before with the Syosset Public Library, and we're doing another one. It's an online panel with readings and discussion. It's based on a New York state of fright. It's some stories from one of the anthologies that many of our members have put together, and it's all stories based in New York, which is kind of cool. So there it is. It's Thursday, June 3rd. It's 7:30 in the evening. It's a free event. The Zoom link is down there on the bottom right. So we have April and Jim were editors of that anthology, and we have Amy Greck, Megan R. Curry, Stephen Van Patten, and Hal Johnson coming to read some of their stories and with the Syosset folks. And they were a lot of fun last time we were with them, and I'm really glad to be doing an event with them again. So, very cool.
Yeah, it should be a great time. And you might have noticed the Summer Scares logo up on that image. I'll pop that up again.
Yes, up on the top right there.
Yeah, and Hal Johnson, his book, Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwoods, is actually one of the Summer Scares picks.
Ah, okay. Yeah. That's cool.
So we were excited to have him participate in this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun.
I think so. Okay. Sorry, I'm just looking for a couple of things on screen there.
That's going to that'll give Jim 2 whole weeks to recover from Stoker before that event. So wow.
That's twice as much time as I need.
Yeah. There's one other cool thing about Stoker, which I think is going to work really well. Since we have people coming from all around the world to attend it, sometimes people are not available during the time period of the normal convention, those in Europe and other parts of the world. But many of these programs are pre-recorded. So that means you don't have to be there exactly at the time to watch them. You can watch them later at night if you get home, when you get home from work, or if you're in a different time zone. So it's an interesting way to accommodate a lot of people. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it should be fun. We wanted to time shift it for exactly that reason, and we'll have plenty of good live programming as well. And the Bram Stoker Award ceremony will be broadcast live Saturday, May 22nd, I think at 8 p.m. That will actually be available to the public, though, because that ceremony is usually open to the public at the convention. So we're just going to broadcast that over YouTube, and that information will be posted probably next week.
Cool. I'm gonna dress up to watch that. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So I think Galactic Terrors, this is, we started this back in September. So this is our 8th episode or 9th episode. And we strive to bring some really fantastic dark fiction to our audience every month. Sometimes with a little bit of a genre blend to it, science fiction and horror, or fantasy and horror, and sometimes just straight up horror fiction, which is always great. And we have a really good mix tonight. I think it's going to be an interesting selection of stories. And I think we're probably wearing out our welcome as co-hosts, chatting so much, and the audience would rather us just get into the good stuff, the authors reading tonight. So Carol, why don't you introduce our first author of the evening?
I'd be delighted to. C.W. Briar is a horror and dark fantasy author from near Binghamton, New York. His debut novel, Whispers from the Depths, received a Publishers Weekly starred review. He's also had multiple short stories published in anthologies such as Places We Fear to Tread. His goal is to be the most famous author from his hometown, which has a population of about 100 people.
All right, thank you for that intro, and I think I'm well on my way with that goal. I am the author of Whispers from the Depths. If you look into dark fantasy, it's got water mages trying to free herself from her captors, rescue her sister as well, but they're all being pursued by a murderous water spirit. And when I pitched that story, I told the publisher that I found new ways to kill people with water, and it was a lot of fun. But actually, I'm going to read one of those short stories that was mentioned, being that we have the New York theme. It's in the anthology Places We Fear to Tread. That small hometown of 100 people was the inspiration for this. It is from upstate New York, west of Binghamton, and it talked about a local legend that's up there with the lady in white. So I'm going to read a passage from that. The only business we could hang out at was JB's, a general store with 2 gas pumps. My sister worked at JB's to pay for her car. Nate and I frequented the place, sometimes to buy jerky or slush puppies, and sometimes just to bug Jen. The owner, Mr. Bauheimer, was pretty tolerant of us, and sometimes he'd throw us a few bucks to shovel snow or mow grass. We met one of our regular visits on July 28th, 1993. I remember every detail of it. That day was hotter than hell, so Nate and I rode there on our bikes to buy ice cream. Jen served us I repeatedly changed my order until she smashed a scoop of mint chocolate chip onto a now broken cone. Nate ordered bubblegum. That's a baby flavor, I chided. So what, he countered. You still like baby bubblegum, Jen said. Her saboteur grin beamed at me from the ice cream service window. I waved my hand in protest. I haven't had it in like a year. Baloney, you got some 2 months ago. Want to bet on it and have Mom settle who's right? Someone inside at the front register rang the bell in quick, impatient succession. Jen snapped around to eye the customer, then grimaced. I gotta go. Someone's in a hurry. Nate cocked a grin. Does that mean we don't have to pay for the ice cream? Leave your change or I hunt you down. Jen sank into the store's shadows. Meanwhile, Nate and I crossed the parking lot to sit under a tree. He dropped jokes while we ate, including the same innuendo about the store's name that other middle schoolers repeated ad nauseum. Mr. Croft's F-150 idled near the propane tank while he leaned out the window and chatted with Mr. Bauheimer. The Kenwick family stopped to fill up at the gas pumps. It was just an average day at JB's, except for one thing. A bizarre utility van parked in the gravel lot across the road. The van looked like a carnymobile, the kind that only passed through when the county fair was setting up in nearby Owego. It was a combination of hippie psychedelia, backpacker preparedness, and wanderer wear and tear. Hypnotic colors oozed down the sides like the aurora borealis. Pockmarked with constellations of rust spot stars. Duct tape covered cracks in one of the rear windows. All sorts of camping equipment was strapped to the rooftop rails, including tarps, chains, and a shovel. The chrome front bumper was so badly eaten away that the van looked like it had a row of reddish shark teeth. It is my home and my adventure all in one, said a man suddenly standing over and behind us. Nate and I jumped at his voice, felt a slap of guilt, as though we'd been caught trespassing on the stranger's property. The man was a winter birch tree, all slender trunk and limbs, swaying slightly while his loafers stayed rooted to the ground. His skin was so tan that it reminded me of my sister's bronzed baby shoes. His age was difficult to judge. Plenty of salt was sprinkled into his hair, but the pepper was impossibly black, more of a spilled ink. When he grinned, wrinkles puckered at his temples and at the corners of his lips, but also in other places, like the right side of his forehead and beneath its chin. The stranger's sunglasses leaned precariously from the tip of a slender nose. They had small, round lenses, but no matter which way he looked, I never seemed to glimpse his eyes. He wore an old-fashioned suit, one that my limited fashion knowledge at 12 years old would have called a tuxedo. The coat's gray threads glinted purple when they caught the right light, and its forked tail hung to his knees. Completing the ensemble was a puffed-up polka dot scarf I would later learn is called an ascot. He was a circus for the eyes, but the most unforgettable thing was the smell wafting off him. I recall wondering if the man wore vinegar as cologne, but not any vinegar I was familiar with. It had a briny, putrid, toxic quality to it, as though the vinegar had fermented in a repurposed turpentine can. In the July heat, the odor was nauseating. I flicked a glance toward the store to make sure adults were still close by. Mr. Kenwick was pumping gas, and Mrs. Kenwick was checking her makeup in the visor mirror. Both were minding their own business. Their 5-year-old, Zachary, on the other hand, he had unbuckled and was gawking at us from the backseat of the car. Zachary looked like he was frozen there, an unblinking sculpture of a child. Boys, would you believe I've explored 4 continents in that vehicle? The stranger's thin olive lips curled into a fishhook smile. His accent was unplaceable, not so much due to the pattern of his pronunciation, but because he had difficulty forming words as though his tongue were too heavy. First, I got it in the USSR, then zigzagged around Europe before tailing it here, where I've driven to every coast of the Americas. The man's presence continued to give me the jitters, but an undercurrent of excitement began to flow through my veins as well. It was the enticing sight of danger, that same feeling that thrummed when Nate and I jumped off a roof into a snow mound, or when we sprinted along the electric fence to agitate Farmer Nichols' bull. We were familiar with calculated risks, how they later became good stories that elevated your status among peers at school. Do you have any good stories? The man asked. That question. It was an odd thing for a stranger to ask under any circumstances, but at that moment, when the word story was stuck in my mind like a sliver, his timing was a pair of tweezers. Was the man a psychic? I thought those were phonies. A sensible part of me wanted to get away from the vinegar stranger, to run inside JB's and take shelter behind the counter with my big sister. Another part of me, however, wanted to see where the conversation would go. We were only talking, after all. A person who had traveled the world would have plenty of interesting tales that I, in turn, could share. It did not matter that they would be secondhand accounts. Stories were social currency to kids, especially in remote places like Tijuana, where nothing interesting ever happened. If I let it slip that I had met some creepy weirdo with a hippie van from Russia at JB's, why, half of my class would be coming to me for the details. Even though I could hear my mother cautioning, "Don't talk to strangers," I stayed where I was. What could happen in plain sight of everyone at the gas station anyway? It wasn't like the man was pointing a gun at us or ordering us to get in his van. At that time, it made so much sense to stay there and listen, even if I couldn't explain why it made sense. Nate and I met each other's cautious glances. He spoke first. "What do you mean? What kinds of stories?" I asked. "Oh, the very best kind of awe, the ones that leave you shivering with questions and doubts long after they're told, the kind that you recite around a campfire, ruining sleep for others because they know the nightmares will come, stories of the supernatural." This guy is whacked, my sensible thoughts cautioned, but I knew I had to stay put. If I left, I would hate myself for missing the next words to come from his mouth. "You could say I'm a merchant of stories," the man said. "I seek out the very best ones and I trade them. I give and I take. My favorites are ghost stories. People do so enjoy them. More than any other, they get handed down over and over through generations. What could be better than shared wonder of unexplained shapes at the corner of our eye or of noises that find us when we are alone?" "Ghost stories are okay, I guess," Nate said. He had downplayed it, but I couldn't disagree with the stranger. I never knew anyone who specifically asked for ghost stories around campfires, but whenever somebody told them one, everyone else paused to listen. It wasn't something I had contemplated before, but yeah, people did like ghost stories, including people that said they don't care for them. "You are probably wondering why I'm here," the stranger said. It was the understatement of the century. "Have you ever heard of the lady in white?" "Yeah, my grandpa told me about her," Nate said. "My dad told me about her too," I said. "Our history teacher talked about her in class." Every local kid knew about the lady in white, though the details tended to vary. Sometimes she was a teenager, sometimes a woman, maybe a bride, maybe not. Different versions claimed she was from the 1800s, the 1920s, or the 1950s. Every version had a few things in common, however. She was always dressed in white, spotted at night by a man driving alone on Devil's Elbow. He would stop to pick her up because of the cold, the rain, or other reasons. The woman would claim there had been an accident, or her husband was hurt, or that she needed to get home to her mama. In every version, the man drove a short distance to the lady's house, but all that remained were the ruins of a cottage being consumed by the forest. The man would stop to let her out, or to ask if they were at the right place, and then the lady would thrust out her arms, scream, and vanish. Typical ghost story, right? Dime a dozen? Here's the weird thing. Since that day I met the vinegar stranger, I've researched the lady in white quite a bit. There were actually lots of reported sightings going back decades, and a cliffside cottage did once exist on Barton Hill, not far from the bend called Devil's Elbow. As a kid, I had figured the lady in white was something my dad made up to scare me, especially since I never saw a cottage. Besides, the curve along the 100-foot cliff hardly seemed dangerous, and certainly not deserving of a name like Devil's Elbow. However, my history teacher had confirmed the stories were real, or at least many details from them were true. Take, for example, that section of road called Devil's Elbow, just west of Owego and near the Tip Top Bar. It used to be sharper and more dangerous. The county dug away that part of the hill and smoothed out the road after multiple hit-and-run accidents. One involved the bride on her honeymoon, waving for help while her new husband changed a tire. Another claimed the life of a young woman as she walked home after waitressing at the Tip Top Bar, at the restaurant that once operated in the building where the Tip Top Bar would later reside. That waitress had lived in a small cottage that was later torn down during the cliff demolition. And what did construction crews find during the excavation? The body of yet another girl, an unknown one, murdered and buried during the 19th century. You can confirm the details for yourself. They're all on record. Back in 93, however, it was just an urban legend to Nate and me. We confirmed to the stranger that we knew of the story. He then asked, "Did you know there are other lady in white stories all over the world?" "No," I said. "Are they similar?" "Similar? They're practically identical. I visit all the sites to pay homage to them. There's the White Lady in Altoona, Pennsylvania, not far from here. Were you aware she was also killed on a stretch of road called Devil's Elbow? Illinois, California, Mississippi have their own ladies in white. Iran, England, Estonia, and dozens more nations have similar ghosts, and those predate the automobile. Do you find that strange? Yeah, Nate said. Kind of weird. What's it mean, though? Like, how do they all get to be so similar? That is the most interesting part, the stranger said. He slowly drew his finger along the cliff of his jawline. People don't know where the stories come from or why they're much alike, and that is what makes it enticing to the imagination, lingering uncertainty. That last word stretched into a drawn-out hiss through his teeth. It sounded like bacon grease in a hot pan. My heart was racing. It was no longer the stranger that unsettled me. I was growing accustomed to him. No, it was the way the story seeped into my mind as he spoke. The longer he went on about the lady in white lore, the more I felt like I needed to catch my breath. Our local legend was part of something older and bigger than our town, and only this stranger, Nate, and I knew it. The intrigue was almost too much, almost painful. I had finished whatever ice cream hadn't melted onto the ground, and I saw an opportunity to extract Nate and myself from the conversation. Got a couple of bucks left. Want to get a Gatorade? Would you care to hear a secret? The stranger asked. Secret? If there's anything more enticing than a good story, it's a secret. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. That was terrific.
Thank you.
Now, do you prefer to go by CW or?
I usually go by Chuck. People can prefer me to Chuck. My full name is Charles Washaleski, and people cannot pronounce or spell it. So that fantasy, the fantasy acronym there, the CW Briar, for the pen name.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, I know we've chatted before too, and I couldn't quite remember. I thought it was okay to go by Chuck, and
that's fine.
Considering that you probably have a viable option of becoming the most famous writer from your hometown, just by surviving, I'm starting to be a little afraid of you. Well, see, I mean, this is like a story prompt: is the people in your hometown start dying mysteriously, and until
that's
you're the only one.
Computer, I'd like to dive into a bit more. It's I actually grew up in the town Barton, and I went to the school Tioga Center. So it's this story was a kind of a combination of those, but it is out there west of Wego, and more people live out in the hills, which is where I was actually from. There's actually very few people in the town.
Oh wow! Okay, so sparsely populated.
Mm-hmm. So I grew up with neighbors and a quarter mile of and woods between you. So it's funny to hear a lot of scary stories out in the woods, and that was home for me growing up there. So I sometimes get a different perspective where the pops of the trees and the noises, and you're like, no, that's just a Tuesday night.
Okay, so does that influence your writing then?
I think it does. Yeah, I think there's a familiarity with it. I think it goes into the little details. I mean, people who grow up in the actual woods or spend a lot of time out there will know that squirrels are extremely loud, or even chipmunks. Like you hear, loud noises. And I went to school at Binghamton University, and I went out to hiking sometimes with friends who are from Long Island, and they would kind of jump at noises that I'm like, oh no, that's totally just a chipmunk, and it sounds loud, but you get used to it. But then the same thing, it's just I have spent time in New York City, but you're just not as accustomed to that, so it's just different life experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've experienced that chipmunk of doom myself while hiking. I'm a Long Islander, and there's some great hiking trails around here, but the wildlife doesn't get much bigger than raccoons and squirrels, so it sounds a lot bigger.
Yep, and we would grow up. We had apple trees in front of our house, and you wake up, and in the morning there's 3 or 4 deer just outside your window.
Yeah, no, that's great. So you're coming kind of from a different place, and how did that factor into the book you were reading from? The location, is that a big part of it? Or?
It is there, and I didn't get into some of the funny comments, but the people who grew up around me would recognize it, where there's the Tip Top Bar represents that little strip club / bar that's down on the country route that everyone kind of either the people who go to it, and then there's a lot of people who make jokes about it, and so that does factor into the story. So it's names and places are changed, but people who I grew up with would be like, yep, I know exactly what you're talking about. JB's, the little country store. We used to do it. We used to ride, down a mile and a half to the woods. You ride your bikes down there to get ice cream in the summer and stuff. So a lot of that's drawn out of my actual experiences growing up.
Interesting. Okay. So we have a question from the audience that I think ties into that. This is from Teal James Glenn. this has a great Bradbury by way of King vibe. Did either of them inspire you? And I'm thinking, I guess,
Yeah.
following on what you just said, King often writes about Maine in the way that you're writing about your area.
Yeah, no, and I thank you for the Bradbury mention. Actually, when I started writing it, I'm like, I want to go for like a something wicked this way comes kind of vibe. So I'm glad to see you picked up on that, and I'm definitely not going to replicate Bradbury. That's near impossible to do. His style is almost repeatable. But I did want to kind of get that vibe and bring that into the story.
Cool.
And it does go much darker from there.
Oh, very good. That's what we like.
Yeah.
And Robert Atone would like to know, what is it about small towns that inspire such creepiness?
I think it's the isolation. You don't have help. You don't have support. I mean, I remember once a few years ago, my son was a baby. I locked him in the car accidentally, and he had to call for some help. Police officer came out and did assist us, but it's a 20-minute drive to get there. If you call 911, you're probably going to be waiting a while for help. If your neighbors are around, if you get a hold of them, they could easily be a half mile away. You are in isolation, and I think that's what kind of makes you nervous. I also knew like certain roads you don't go because don't trust these kind of neighbors. They're the ones that put up posted signs in every other tree and they mean it. So you just don't know what's out there. You don't get to know the people. You don't necessarily see them. I had neighbors, people that are like on the other side of the hill. You never see them, and you don't know who they are. And you occasionally hear the gunshots going off there. Do they hunt? Are they just shooting for fun? You don't know. And so I think that's where the creepiness comes in from. And then you get in the natural aspect. You're surrounded by nature. So the natural and the supernatural are at a finger's reach away.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting that you know the people are there, but you don't have a connection to them really. And people, I think, probably seek out that kind of privacy and isolation, and other people are totally uncomfortable with it. Here's a bit of, I guess, more of a trivia question from Amy Greck. Is the Roscoe Diner still there? Is that anywhere near you?
I'm trying to remember. I think the Roscoe Diner. I'm trying to think if it's still open, but yeah, it was up until a couple of years ago. It was still there. I'm trying to remember if it's still open, but it was there until a couple of years ago. I know exactly what you're talking about. I have not been there in a while. Okay,
thank you, Amy. So, what do you to prepare for a new project, whether you're writing short fiction or novel? What's the first thing you do? The first step you take? Do you outline? Do you just start making notes? Or
I have to outline a skeletal frame of it. I have to know what the theme of a story is, especially if it's a longer piece, because it's going to be tied to the story. If I don't know what the theme is, I don't know, what's going to be kind of driving characters and stuff like that. Major characters, I do need to know what drives them. I need to know what their inspiration is, what their backstory is. And then the major points of the story, before I start, I will probably have a vague idea what the ending is. I'll have the major beats of the story, and then I fill in the gaps. I like to describe it as, being on the hilltops and there's rolling hills. You can see the high points of the narrative, but you have some freedom on how you get to those points.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then are urban legends, I guess, or in your case, it'd be rural legends, like the Lady in White, or are those something that you're particularly
cryptids?
Okay.
Yeah, cryptids, urban legends. I actually incorporate a lot of actual urban legends from this. The Lady in White was not only a local one, but I mentioned Altoona. There is a white lady out there. There is out in California and stuff. It is a common occurrence in stories. And so I want to tell a story of why that story seems to repeat all throughout the world. And so that's where I had a little bit of fun with it. I didn't want to just tell the story of the Lady in White. I want to do something fun and new. That often comes into my work. A lot of, I guess, philosophical debates come in too. I may take some arguments about two sides and embed that into different characters, and then just let it play out, and oftentimes in the worst way possible.
Right, because these are horror stories.
Horror stories.
Yeah. Well, the idea of the Lady in White being sort of a universal phenomenon resonated with me. There, Karen Warren, who's an Australian author who was on Galactic Terrors a few months back, wrote a story set in Fiji, I think, with a sort of Lady in White Phantom hitchhiker basis. And so, it was the first time that it occurred to me, wow, this kind of myth exists in other cultures. Yeah.
Yeah,
so
it is mind-blowing to me that both Wego and Altoona have a lady in White, and they both take place on a place called Devil's Elbow, which was odd to me. I'm like, okay, I can get the lady in white thing. It's kind of this ghostly image, but to have them in the same place name is strange.
Yeah, a coincidence. A strange coincidence. All right, I think we have time for one more question from the audience. Do you find the contrast between an innocent child and the evil character effective?
I do, and actually that played heavily into, I'll just mention now, what I'm working on now. The reason I read from this one is I had a couple of short stories I've done recently, and I wanted to kind of bring them together in a short story collection. I realized they all have children, and it all gets into the idea of innocence and innocence contrasted with evil. And I said, let's run with this. So I'm actually started working on a collection called Sticks and Stones, and it's all going to be horror stories involving childhood. I think there's a very unique dynamic there. I think the two things that come up often are the contrast of the innocence of children with evil, but also there's that coming of age where you start to become aware of evil and what we're capable of, what other people are capable of, and that factors into a lot of the stories I've already started working on.
Very interesting. Okay, so that's something to look forward to from you, Sticks and Stones.
Future work.
All right. Well, Chuck, thank you so much for the
Thank
reading. We'll have you back on at the end with everyone else to do a little bit more talk and chat about what's coming up next.
Okay.
And
thank you.
On to our next reader.
Thanks.
All right. Up next is Loretta H. Campbell. Loretta is proud to be an African-American woman, a freelance writer, a short story writer, and a native of New York City. Let's welcome Loretta.
Hello, I'm reading my short story from this anthology, Hell's Malls. And this roadside story introduces the twins who appear later in my upcoming graphic novels. Roadside Mall Road. Chase loved to shop at Roadside Mall. So did his victims. Chase's cell phone rang. "Hey, Hope baby," he said, merging into traffic. His wife's lovely face showed in the phone. "Hey, you. Are you on your way? The twins want to know when you'll be home." He glanced at the phone and blew her a kiss. "Me too," she added with a little pout. She was wearing his favorite blazing red lipstick. In his opinion, real women wore deep red lipstick. "Yeah, me too, you," he growled, enjoying the warmth spreading through his lower body. "Can we talk to Daddy?" His children's voices piped in. "Hey, sweethearts, you should be in bed." "We were, but we got out. Will you be home soon?" Sophia asked, jumping up and down with excitement. "Yes, very soon. Tell you what, Daddy will cook you breakfast tomorrow morning. Would you like that?" "Daddy, you can't cook," Sybil said, folding her arms across her chest for emphasis. Feigning her feelings, he said, "Wow. Okay, you can cook me breakfast then." One daughter giggled and the other snorted and nodded. "Okay," his wife said, taking the phone back. "Back to bed, you two." "Night, Daddy," they said, waving at the screen and walking away. "Well, oh, hello," Hope said. "Why are you saying hello?" Chase asked. "I'm talking to your company," she said, pointing to the back seat of the car. "What company?" Chase said, looking in the rearview mirror. The dead boy, Toddy, sat there. His eyes were shaded by the fading light, but Chase knew they were closed. Chase screamed, "No, you can't be here. You're dead. You're dead." He tried to open the door to get away from the dead boy, but the door wouldn't open. It was locked. He was trapped with the boy that he had just killed. Far away, he could hear Hope's voice yelling something. He had to get out of the car, but it was moving. He couldn't control it or make it stop. The dead boy was sitting right behind him. How could that be? "Wake up. You're having a nightmare." Somehow he had to find that voice. Gulping air and swimming in his own sweat, Chase woke up. Hope turned on the bedside lamp. "Chase, baby, what is it?" He couldn't answer right away. Was everything where it was supposed to be? Was there someone in the room, maybe in the shadows by the window, behind the window curtain? He jumped out of bed and threw the curtains open. What are you doing? Hope asked. Chase, what are you looking for? Then he saw his reflection in the dresser mirror. His hair glistened with the perspiration that spotted his pajamas down to his crotch. Still, the floor felt solid, and he could move around the room. The bedroom door was open as it was on most nights. His wife sat in bed, waiting for an answer. Chase put on his best facade. Nothing, baby. Just a nightmare. Things have been tense at work lately. Did someone at work die? She asked with a worried look on her face. Die? You kept screaming you're dead. No, no one's dead. Chase, this job is too much. It's been too much for years. Look what it's doing to you. You're stressed out. You know how it is. Sometimes it's just very busy. He ran his fingers through his hair. Ignoring his last response, she continued, It's been 5 years. You said that you would look for another job by now. You promised to spend more time with me and the girls. That airline sees more of you than we ever do. I'm a pilot, Hope. I go where they send me. Yes, but if you teach it, you can stay in one place, like home. This was an old argument with a stalemate instead of a resolution. Chase enjoyed his job and the freedom it afforded him to travel. The opportunities were endless. You're right. Next year will be my last. As Hope was about to speak, Chase heard a giggle coming from the direction of their daughter's room. Hear that? What? I think we woke them up. No, I think Daddy woke them up, Hope said, clearly annoyed about the extent of their argument. Since I'm up, I'll just go check on the girls, Chase said, getting away from the fight. Hope sighed and settled back into bed. Still shaky from the dream, Chase entered the hallway. He heard another giggle. Their daughters were basically good kids, but they were night owls. It was always a chore getting them to sleep. As was his habit, Chase opened the door quickly in order to catch his daughters awake and playing some kind of game when they were supposed to be sleeping. The faint glow of their nightlight surrounded the girls. Their heads were touching. Even in sleep, they seemed to share the same thoughts. Either they were feigning sleep very convincingly, or they really were sound asleep. Chase was certain that he had heard a giggle. He stood at their door, watching them for several minutes. Neither of them moved, so he decided to go back to bed. He had just gone into the master bathroom when both girls screamed. His wife ran into their daughter's room. Close on her heels, Chase followed and turned on the overhead light of the girls' bedroom. Once again, he looked around. There was no one there. What is it, sweeties, huh? Did something scare you? He asked from his place by the door. The twins buried themselves in their mother's arms and peered out at their father to answer. It was a boy, Sybil began, and a man was hurting him, Sophia continued. Bad. The man called him Toddy, they said in unison. There's nobody here, see? Chase walked swiftly around the room, snatching open the closet door and jerking back the curtains. He even checked under the bed. If you girls would go to sleep instead of playing at night, you wouldn't have bad dreams. Can't you see how upset they are? Hope said. The twins snuggled with their mother and cowered from their father's tirade. Daddy just had a bad dream himself, so he's very grumpy, Hope said, stroking their heads. Their breathing slowed and both fell into a deep sleep. I'm going back to bed. You coming? What do you think? Hope said, clearly annoyed. She nestled between their children. Chase strode from the room, not bothering to turn off the lights. In the master bedroom, Chase sat and tried to think about what, if anything, he should do. The house was quiet. The street outside was quiet. His thoughts drowned out the quiet. Somehow, his daughter's dreams had exposed their father's killing. Then he heard another sound. It wasn't a giggle. It was a snicker, a boy's snicker. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. His imagination went back to the dream. Man up, Chase, he said out loud. That's impossible. He got up and went to the bedroom door. There were light footsteps outside the door, and within seconds, Sybil and Sophia walked in. They held hands as they often did, but their eyes were closed. They appeared to be sleepwalking. When did this kind of behavior start? Normal, he thought. Return to normal. Girls, you seem to be having a busy night. No response. Your mother must still be asleep. Let's get you back to bed, he said, reaching for their hands. Until tomorrow morning. Tomorrow we will cure you of this sleepwalking shit, he thought. When they didn't respond the second time, he decided to gently shake them awake. Somewhere he'd heard that sleepwalkers shouldn't be jarred awake. It was bad for their psychological health or something. Both girls opened their eyes. Bloody tears ran down their cheeks. Chase threw his hands back as if they were burning. His next thought was to get out of the room and away from his daughters. Beyond this, his mind wouldn't go. Whatever was happening, he had to get away. They wouldn't let him. The girls ran toward their father, baring their teeth, grunting. Seized with an instinctual fear, he ran. Bigger and faster, Chase was able to get to the master bathroom seconds before his daughters. He locked the door, something he had never done before. Once inside, he felt silly. These were his daughters. They wouldn't hurt him, yet he was afraid of them. A strange scraping sound came from the other side of the door. Chase took a deep breath and tried to think, but the noise distracted him. The sound changed. It sounded like someone was spitting something on the floor. All he could think of was a late-night snack. He chuckled at the thought. Get yourself together, Chase Hiderson, he said out loud. Open the fucking door and put your daughters to bed. Sybil, Sophia, I'm coming out. I am very disappointed in your behavior. In response, the twins put their mouths to the door frame and said, Hello, Chase. It's your little piece of trash, Toddy. Chase knew that voice. There was no mistaking it. But it couldn't be. Terrified, Chase wet himself. Who's there? It was the silliest question possible, and he knew it. Still, he had to say something, break the silence, the terrifying silence, except for the scraping sound. He realized they were trying to scrape through the door. A new sound caught his attention. Something was clicking, like teeth chattering. It was the sound you make when you're very cold. It wasn't a sound you'd hear on this warm summer night. It was a wet, sucking sound, like someone chewing with an open mouth. Wood, his daughters, were biting and chewing the bathroom door. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, Loretta. I have read this story before and you still have me on the edge of my seat. Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Thank you for sharing your words. That's neat. Okay, you know, there's something that I was just struck with hearing you read it this time. So many stories have a dream in them and it's like, yeah, it's overdone and all this, but you started this out with a dream that seemed very realistic and you defined the characters through that dream, and you know, they seem like perfectly normal people. Then we realized, oh, that's a dream. And then he goes through all this stuff and the girls come back again. It's a different kind of a bad image, you know, using the same girls. So first they're the lovely, friendly, happy thing, and then they're the evil thing. It's like, very well done. Very well done. So that's cool. Cool. So what how do you get started on a story? What do you think of the characters first? Do you think of what the ending is? What inspires you to start something?
Whenever I imagine a story, I'm sorry, that's a reflex. Whenever I imagine a story, I know the ending before I know the middle.
Okay.
And I know the beginning. And so I just write the whole thing out.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like cooking for me. I look at textures, you know, what can you put to spice up the food? So I begin to texture it, if that can be a verb, and put in, you know, characterization. As I just heard someone say, backstory. I began to put in basically the imagery that I think is going to really give the information that I felt when I began to imagine the ending, and I work from the beginning through that to the end. Several thousand times. I mean, I'm a great believer in the power of revision.
Iteration is a wonderful thing. Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, and you really did that. I mean, those girls, they open their eyes with the creepy, bloody tears. And it's like, oh, wait, oh, we're going way south with this. You know, that's the first real hint that something's really wrong there. So, yeah, that's really cool. That's neat.
Thank you.
So, what got you started writing?
Well, I think probably a few things. I was a reader when I was, a kid, and I had this uncle who said to me once, you should write down some of the things you talk about so much. And I'm going, okay. So he said, you should get a diary. And I thought, oh, I love this idea of having a diary. So I began writing things in my diary, poems and little stories and blah, blah, blah. Everyday things that happened that were catastrophic when I was 14 and that are not that important when you're 14 and a half. So I simply began, and from that, and I thought, oh, and I always did well in English in school, English classes, essays and so forth. And I thought, what can you do with this? And my family wasn't really supportive. I mean, they couldn't imagine a Black girl writing for a living ever. But I began to, of course, read other writers, and I thought, other people are doing this. But it still took time. My degree in journalism, because my mother thought, okay, if you want to be a writer, they make money. You won't make money doing what you want to do, but reporters make money.
Yeah. Well, that's smart. I told my mother I wanted to be an anthropology major when I was in my sophomore year of college, and her answer was, you can't put butter on that and eat it. And yeah, she was absolutely right to a degree, and I wound up in computer science, but that's a whole nother story. Yeah. So I'm curious to know, do you still have that journal from when you were 14? Have you looked at it since?
No, what happened is when I went away to school, I had a whole bunch of them at home and I eventually threw them away.
Yeah.
But what's really funny was I stopped for a number of years and then I started up again. And I had in the house for years, I think at least 30 years worth of journals, diaries that went back for 30 something years. And one day I thought, this is taking up way too much space. I need this for my books.
Yeah.
So I gathered them all up and just went out to the nearest dumpster and went, So this is like 30 years of God knows what. So I thought, okay, you got it. So I never really used them for stories. And people always say, oh, I'm going to use this for a story. I listen to what people are talking about and I use that for a story.
Oh, okay.
Conversations, things that I know that happened. And I kind of go, oh, that would be interesting.
Yeah.
But the diaries, long gone.
Okay. It's probably just as well. I read some of my college ones. It's like, oh, it was painful. It was really, I didn't want to remember some of those things.
No, I lived through it once. I'm done.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, we have a question from Alt Beck who wants to know, what's your writing schedule, or do you only write when you're inspired?
Yes.
Okay.
I try to have a schedule, and I found that I work better at night between 8:30 and 11:30. Don't ask. So if I get up in the morning, I'm going to write. I read the paper. I look at my email. I look at Netflix. If I have a gig, I'm working. I mean, it's like my brain is, but at night, suddenly I'm going, oh, ghoulies and ghosties, oh my, that kind of thing, to mix, movies and metaphors. But I'm sort of like better at writing at night. And I really write well when I have a deadline. I mean, as I said, I have a degree in journalism, so deadlines kind of like, oh, okay, you got to do this, you got to do this. But if I'm writing a piece, I'll revise it till the world drops. It's like, I'll just keep revising until there's my hands fall off. So that's my schedule is kind of like whatever I need to do and at night.
Mm-hmm. And I'm a firm believer of, how do you know when you're done? When you hit the deadline. That's how you know when you're done. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
So somebody, Horror Feminista, commented, those twins. Is that the novel Loretta is working on now? Are you working on more with these characters?
Yeah. Actually, I'm working on graphic novels in which they appear. I picked the names because the names are symbolic. Sophia means wisdom, and Sybil is, basically the oracle. And so I'm using them to sort of look at how it is they deal in the supernatural world.
Okay. Well, that's very cool.
Yeah. It's fun.
Bonnie had a question about this particular story as well. Did you begin with the dream premise? Or did it get you?
It kind of came through something else because there was a larger story.
Okay.
And it basically got chopped down. And when it got chopped down, the dream thing kind of like really popped out. So
Okay.
That's how it got to be the dream thing. No, or nightmare, really. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is a really good question from Laura Tucker. Where can you get the book your story is in?
Well, as I said, it's from the anthology Hell's Malls, of which I have copies to sell. So if you want to buy a copy, and I certainly hope you do, y'all, you can contact me. I don't know if I put my contact information out. You can do it through Horror Writers Association, whatever. But I'm approachable, reachable, whatever you need to do. Tell me. I'm happy to make myself available.
Okay. Yeah. Somebody can leave a comment on our Facebook event, and you can reach out to them that way as well. It's also available for those who aren't anywhere near where Loretta is. It's also available on Amazon, and we just got the link up in there. There's a number of us from the New York chapter who have stories in there, and I have one too. So that's why I got to read yours early, Loretta. It was so much fun. Yeah, it's fun being a co-anthologist with you.
Co-anthologist. I like that. We just got a new word going there. Cool.
Yeah, I may have just made it up, but that's okay. That's reasonable. Yeah. So the other thing I'm wondering is well, I don't want to talk about the end of the story because I don't want to give anything away. Yeah. But that's cool. So are all of your stories in a city area? Are they outside, or do you have a particular location you like to write about?
I thought about that for a minute because my family's from the South, and I spent a lot of years in the South, but I spent most of my time in New York. And I am really giving a lot of thought to putting my locations in either New York City or in cities. Mostly because I don't think that people think of cities as being that frightening. They think of places where you're going to have like a lot of woods, trees, open spaces.
Yeah.
But I like the idea of having a place that is basically anonymous in a city that really is huge, because you can almost be like a non-entity on a big city. I like the idea of having that be frightening. The immediacy of fear, something you wouldn't expect.
Yeah. And you can get lost in there. Yeah. So, and there's also a comment from Amy who points out that the editor April Gray from Hell's Mall has been doing a Hell's anthology every year, each on a different theme.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this story. It was fun. I've read it on paper, like I said, but it was really fun to hear you read it as well. So I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll have you come back at the end. We can all chat a little bit for the last few minutes. But thanks so much. Yeah. Well, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next reader. Oliver Baer was the editor for Cthulhu Sex Magazine and Two Backed Books. He mostly writes dark poetry and horror stories, with the occasional blog post, review, essay, and play. He has 2 books out, Letters to the Editor of Cthulhu Sex Magazine and Bare Soul, as well as being published in a number of magazines, journals, collections, and anthologies. He also has a CD of poetry set to music, Gathering Souls, by a conclave of Bear, which became a show in New York City. He's appeared as an indescribable horror from the depths, sometimes with a lightsaber, and his likeness has appeared on TV and film while his voice has been heard on internet radio. He's visible using the virtual spectrum of social media by following him on Twitter at Obear and on Facebook, Obear3. Much of his work can be found at tentacularity.wordpress.com. And come to his Facebook page for his monthly readings. We'll drop some of those links in the chat in a little bit. So I'd like to welcome Oliver Baer.
Hello. So this story is from is I think probably right now the only sci-fi story that I have, and it takes place in a bar, and our main character is doesn't really have eyes. He has, let's say, VR glasses. And he just met a man who wants to do sort of a backroom information technology sale with him. And he has a sort of, he's not clear if it's symbiote, um, that's maybe nanotechnology, which is called the Fugue. And it's a translucent, silvery, amorphous being that seems to be able to control its shape and density, that communicates telepathically. So Desmond walked to the back of the bar and up the stairs to his room, while Mr. Lomar waited at the bar. Desmond had always conducted business in his room. That is why he had asked for the only room upstairs in the back. It was out of the way enough that if there was a disturbance, it would not cause any undue alarm in either the owner or the patrons of the bar. It also allowed him a certain amount of privacy for his deals. A half hour later, there was a knock at the door. Desmond, sitting on the bed, arranging the wares in his case, says, "Come in," with what he is sure is a look of surprise on his face. His voice seemed very distant and strange. It was also more throaty, with a Cajun twang. As the door opens, he feels very lightheaded. The room becomes a fuzzy red haze with black fingers of glass running through it. Then it blinks. Not as if his eyelids, since he wasn't sure he even had eyes, closed and then opened. More like a giant wing had passed in front of him, and he had blinked in startled response. In addition, the fugue started singing to him. It wasn't really singing per se. It was more like an intensification of voices. It was as if the whole bar, patronage, bartender, owner, everyone was sitting in his room trying to talk over each other. Mr. Lomart had walked in with the required amount on his card. It had taken him longer than he expected to accrue it. But after the initial conversation with Mr. Desmond, he had sat at the bar for a couple of minutes, thinking that not only of the stimulation the VR would bring to the pleasure center of his brain on those lonely nights, but also of how he would be able to obtain the real thing by showing off its effects. Not to mention how cool he would be with a pair of holographic eyes. When asked how much they were, he would answer with the dangerous story of how he obtained them, not forgetting to mention the exorbitant price he had to pay and how little it meant to him. Upon arriving at this point in his scenario, he reached into his pocket to check his plastic. Upon checking his credit with his pocket CVS accounter, he realized he was a bit short for this transaction. Surprised, he leaned over, mentioned to the bartender that he would be right back, and walked out to the nearest branch of the CVS. "Open for all your lives," was the strange but inviting flashing neon slogan that greeted him but a block from the bar. Plastic had long since replaced money and ID. Everything was now located on one card. This made it easier for Central Data and Storage to keep track of everyone. No one knew why the largest bank and info center was called Central Data and Storage. There didn't seem to be a reason for the storage part of it. Mr. Desmond seemed to have some odd thoughts about it, though, thought Mr. Lomart. Something about cloning, genetic engineering, and hybridization. Outside the CVS branch, Mr. Lomart was
Okay, we seem to have had some internet connectivity issues for Oliver. That's too bad. Oliver, if you can hear us, I suggest you drop out and try to come back into the broadcast. All right.
told him to come in.
Oh, he's back. Excellent.
Oh, was I gone? Okay, sorry.
You froze up for a few seconds there.
Okay.
So
Where did I freeze up?
I can't say exactly. I would go back maybe a couple of sentences and then just pick it up from there.
All right. Outside the CDS branch, Mr. Lomart was punching his code in the ATM. He put his card in the slot when asked and punched the withdrawal amount in. He walked back to the bar and walked straight through to the back, making sure to wave to the bartender as he passed. Mounting the stairs, he could barely contain himself. He was going to be the envy of the social scene now. No more lonely nights. He approached the door to the room at the back and knocked. A different voice told him to come in. He pushed open the door with his guard up. There was a woman sitting on the bed near Mr. Desmond's case. At least he thought it was a woman. "I'm here to see Mr. Desmond," he said. He rubbed his eyes. The light seemed a bit too soft and low in here. He had something to take care of. "I'm his partner, Desiree," she said in a voice that had a sharp southern twang to it. "Please come, sit here beside me until he comes back. All the arrangements will be made then. I've been instructed to take your measurements while you're waiting." This seemed a little odd to Mr. Lomar, he thought. They were one size fits all. But I guess you get what you pay for, he sighed to himself. He sat down next to the woman. She was not unattractive. He could not judge her height accurately, but guessed she was about 5'10", with an olive complexion and short dark hair. There was a thin athleticism about her body that sent hormones racing through his body. She was presently taking off a long black dress, the kind he had seen in a Gothic play once. "Do you really have to do that?" he asked, trying to contain himself. "Relax. I'm just getting into my work clothes," she said teasingly. She walked around to the other side of the bed to start massaging his head and neck. As she runs her fingers slightly over his face and lips, he can't take the roaring in his ears and body anymore. He pulls her toward him. She kisses him with a deep longing that he imagines only happens when two centuries-seeking souls finally meet. There's a lot of sex stuff in here that I'm not going to describe. Mr. Lomar isn't exactly sure what happened next. But then, Mr. Lomar isn't sure of much anymore because Mr. Lomar is dead. The fugue has stopped singing. The voices have calmed themselves. The room seems to be the same. Des is the one who feels different. For one thing, there's a cool tingly sensation where he believes his eyes are. Next, there's a man on the disheveled bed with a hole in its chest and his neck torn open. Now, Des is awake. He jumps up from his place on the bed and stumble runs retching to the bathroom. This is not his work. He finished spewing his drinks into the toilet, stood up, reached for a towel, and looked in the mirror. This prompted him to return to his previous kneeling position. After a couple of minutes of clearing what little fluid was left in his body, Desmond stood up again and looked at himself in the mirror with a glower. He was going to kill his sister. There we go. That's it right now for this story.
Thank you, Oliver. That was great. And despite the technical difficulties,
It worked out.
As Teal put it, you'd been consumed by the central data and storage for outing them.
If only it was that simple. If only it was that simple.
Yes. So I'm actually very happy to have this opportunity to interview you. I have a lot of scrolls worth of burning questions for you.
Well,
questions only you can answer. What's that?
I'm good with the burning.
Excellent. My first question is, how many shoggoths does it take to change a light bulb?
Do you really need the light bulb?
I never thought of it that way. Excellent. The second one is, how did you find that amazing virtual background that makes you look like you exist in our world?
Oh, yeah, well, let's just say it's eldritch magic.
Something else you're very familiar with.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's eldritch magic and the wonders of technology. So, there you go. The only thing I wasn't able to do was get that hand away from the fruit. So, I couldn't block that out. My magic didn't work that well.
No matter how you defend yourself, they're still trying to claw their way through to you.
That's exactly it. That's the problem. They can't keep them in one place. It's like trying to hold them in a closet. So I wouldn't know about that, but
let's hope not. So you recently were the subject of a new song.
Yes.
Which I have listened to several times.
Oh, thank you. Well done.
the most amazing song that I've ever heard that manages to include uh, multiple references to tentacle porn and bleeding groins in the lyrics in such a
Yeah,
charming and friendly way.
yeah. Well, she's very good at that.
Tell us a little bit about the musician, the song, how that came to be.
So that song came about because, as you said in your introduction, I did this show. Well, I actually tried to do it, yeah, last year as a Facebook room / live production, which is a poetry set to music show. And the idea of behind the show, which also has become a collaborative project, which I encourage anybody watching this, you don't have to be a musician to do this, is you can take any of my work and interpret it in any way you would like. And that's really the premise behind the collaborative project. And that was sort of the premise behind the Poetry Set to Music show, which is I have a lot of friends who are musicians, composers, singer songwriters. I was on this scene here in the East Village that was at a place called Sidewalk Cafe, which doesn't exist anymore. Uh, and So people I knew from there, I would put this idea to them, and then you know have like 4 people um, do a show where I hosted the show as an incompetent cult leader, um, and so I had a lot of banter in between. So this lady, who actually does happen to be my neighbor. So in the song, she mentions me as her neighbor. She is actually my neighbor, but she lives at the other end of the block from me. And so I invited her to do the show, and she got up to do her bit, and she said, "Well, none of Oliver's poems really spoke to me, but I decided to write a song about Oliver himself." So she got up and she did that song, and I thought it was amazing, but I didn't think it was really going to go anywhere other than that show. So it was played for like, you know, a room of maybe if that night maybe it was 20 people. I think it was less than that. Um, but but then so I thought that was the last of it, and then earlier this year she emailed me um, that she had taken that song and put it on her new album. Her name's Phoebe Kreutz. Her new album is Leaky Canoe. And the song is That Dude, and it's about me. Does mention tentacle porn several times, which is in relation to the magazine I did, Cthulhu Sex. And yeah, and so she knows a bunch about me, so she put all about that in the song, and I guess that's roughly how that came about.
Yeah, and
So
it's a surprisingly upbeat melody to
yes,
the
it's a
start of the
very
song,
upbeat melody.
so it's really neat. I think you can find it on Bandcamp, so
Yeah, it's on
it's worth a
Bandcamp.
listen.
I think the URL is lousymoon.bandcamp.com. Lousy Moon is the record company that put out her album, and I believe it's actually in Germany. So if you want to buy it, the price is in euros. I
Okay,
think. I'm pretty sure.
good to know.
Um,
And then just to circle back for a minute, now you were one of the co-founders and editors of Cthulhu Sex magazine, which ran for many years before
right.
it
10.
concluded its course. 10 years, amazing run. And if I remember correctly, just to set the record straight about tentacle porn, the name really didn't have anything to do with sex. It was just the two weirdest things you could stick together to think of to
Exactly.
stick together to get attention.
Right. Right.
Okay.
I mean, the main sex related thing is my partner in that venture, Michael Morrell. He had a real vision for the magazine, and his vision was much more to try to have a magazine that celebrated erotic horror, which when we did the magazine wasn't as much a thing as it is now. So basically, people kept lumping us in with porn because every time we tried to push and insist on erotic horror, people kept shifting us somewhere else that we did not want to be. So,
But the magazine was more Lovecraftian.
right, exactly.
And you published quite a few prominent authors throughout the run.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So
it was much more about Lovecraft and trying to do Lovecraftian stories that he would never write.
All right, we do have one question from the audience.
Only one.
Whose hand is that?
Whose hand is up? You know what? I'm still getting used to the fact that human beings have names. So
it's one of your hapless cultists.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you sell yourself short. I think you're a very competent cult leader.
Yeah, well, you're right. It was a cult member. I'm trying to reconstitute them.
All right. So, Oliver, we're going to move on to our next reader, but we'll have you back on at the end of the program to chat a bit about what you have coming up next. Thanks so much for your reading.
You're welcome.
All right. Our next reader is Hildy SIlverman. She was the editor-in-chief of Space and Time magazine for 12 years. She's a fiction author whose recent publications include Sidekicked in Release the Virgins, Divided We Fell in The Dystopian States of America, and Raising the Dead in Badass Moms. Her nonfiction articles have appeared in numerous legal and medical professional journals and blogs. She is a member of the Crazy 8 Authors Collective. So please join me in welcoming Hildy SIlverman.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I am going to be reading from a short story that will be coming out in an anthology called Devilish and Divine. That's published by eSpec Books with John French as the editor. I believe it's going to be out sometime a bit later this summer. And the story is called The Bionic Mermaid versus the Sea Demons. Thessalonica felt the heat of Commander Summer James' glare from across the sizable conference room. I know you must have an excellent reason for interrupting this highly sensitive meeting, Agent. The delegation from the United Nations and Ocean Security Council had recently arrived in Okinawa for high-level meetings on possible illegal whaling activity. Japan had signed on to the Treaty of Triton with the mayor, Thessalonica's people, although they no longer acknowledged her as such, later than many other surface nations, due to the stipulation that all whaling cease. However, they had adhered to the terms for a decade, which made their caginess over a recent mayor sighting of a trawler hauling a whale aboard worthy of a face-to-face. Thessa chafed at being scolded. Commander, my apologies, but this could not wait. We have intel regarding a disturbance from the fault known as the Pacific Ring of Fire. The senior Japanese official, Minister Yamamoto, exclaimed, "If this is so, then why are my people not the ones reporting it?" Thessa shrugged. Perhaps UNOSC monitoring is superior to yours. He bristled, so she quickly added, or maybe they just do not believe this is cause for alarm. James's eyes narrowed. But you do. Commander, if I may, Oliver Martinez, another UNOSC agent assigned to the whaling investigation, held up an electronic tablet. Upon James's nod, he joined her at the head of the table and pointed to the screen. This is a graph of the seismic activity detected. It doesn't match what a tectonic shift would produce. The delegates around the long cherry wood table began muttering. Clarify, please, said James. This activity indicates something really large has erupted from the depths of the trench. He ran his forefinger across the tablet. It looks to be coming right for us. James pinched the bridge of her nose. These readings don't make sense, Agent Martinez. Yeah, I know. He shrugged. Surface dwellers, Thessa thought. As long as she'd lived among them, Thessa doubted she would ever understand them fully. Why did unfamiliarity keep them from accepting facts? Instead, they tried to deny them or force them into conforming to their known science. Yet what they actually knew about the world would not fit in a clamshell. Now was the time for action, not debate. Thessa said, Commander James, our immediate concern is that whatever has risen from the trench is heading for Okinawa rapidly. We must evacuate the populace. The chatter around the table grew louder. Are you mad? Yamato stared as though Thessa had just transformed her bionic legs into a tail. How are we supposed to do that with scarcely any notice and no clear explanation why? Martinez abruptly turned away with his finger pressed against the comlink in his right ear. When he looked back, his dark eyes were wide. Commander, a UNOSC drone has a visual on the anomaly. God, I don't even know what... Hold on. He hastily linked his tablet to the conference room projector. A minute later, the drone feed appeared on the front wall. Several people gasped. All eyes shifted to the commander and Yamato. The minister snatched a cell phone out of his pocket and began hastily relaying what Thessa hoped were mass evacuation orders. Agents, thank you, said James curtly. The team here will assist our Japanese hosts with making all necessary arrangements. I trust the two of you to coordinate a frontline response. Dismissed. Thessa saluted and joined Martinez in a hasty exit. As they hurried through the conference center, she wondered briefly when walking had become so natural for her that she barely noticed doing it anymore. Brushing the extraneous thought aside, she said, the drone image was blurry, but I was able to make out the shape of what swims this way. A childhood memory stirred. I believe I have seen this creature before, not with my own eyes, but as an illustration in a, what would you call it? An educational papyrus. You mean a mere textbook? Close enough. But this creature should not exist, not anymore. If it does, she twined a strand of orchid-colored hair around her index finger. Uh-oh. Martinez twirled his forefinger. You're doing that thing you do with your hair when you're really anxious. This is bad. She was too absorbed by the potential threat to express annoyance at his overly attentive, yet accurate observation. If memory serves, yes. What do you think it is? Martinez asked. Because it sure as hell looks like a giant sea serpent with several spare heads. If I am correct, it is a demon. He stopped abruptly. A what now? She met his wide-eyed gaze. A demon, an ancient creature that serves dark and dangerous gods. And if Mare lore is accurate, there may be more. How many? She frowned. That is but one answer we urgently require. A seven-headed sea demon the size of a mid-rise skyscraper rose off Okinawa mere hours later, sending a wall of water crashing over the peninsula's coast. The tsunami warning siren had sounded, but the short timing hadn't allowed for a full evacuation, so most of Okinawa's citizens fled to designated local shelters. Unfortunately, judging by the panic Thessa observed in the streets, not everyone would reach safety before the demon came ashore. The UNOSC delegation was woefully short of field personnel, having come unprepared for more of the boardroom negotiations. She and Martinez did their best with who they had, establishing a perimeter in partnership with local law enforcers based on where they expected the demon to surface. When the beast rose from the shallows, bellowing from all seven throats, they opened fire. Two heads snaked down and rose with four screaming Okinawan officers in their jaws. A moment later, blood sprayed and the screaming ceased. The demon continued wading north along the peninsula's coast. Jesus! Martinez clapped a hand against his forehead. What are we supposed to do against this thing? Focus, Agent. Thessa squeezed his shoulder briefly. What is its trajectory? He consulted his tablet. Motobu, a click north of us. Then we follow and keep it from advancing farther on shore. She relayed orders to the joint response teams to fall back. Their weapons were ineffective, so there was no point wasting ammo or sacrificing more lives. All they could do was follow and observe. When the demon reached Motobu, it stopped in front of a reddish-hued building near the coastline. One head reared back and spat something black onto the roof, which began to bubble and dissolve. What is that place? Thessa asked. The Oceanic Culture Institute. Martinez shook his head. What could a sea monster want from a museum? I do not know, but I find it doubtful that this is a random target. The creature plunged more heads into the now gaping hole in the roof. It seems to be searching for something within. She twisted her hair around her forefinger, which confirms that it is not acting of its own accord. Why is that? Demons are not particularly intelligent, according to the lore. They are described as servants to powerful beings. The sea demon spat a second bellyful of caustic substance onto the roof. If it were uncontrolled, it would simply rampage. So we should just sit back and let it get whatever for whoever, and it'll leave? Martinez sounded hopeful. She shook her head. I suggest that whoever has the power to control this demon should not get what they want. I was afraid you'd say that. Two free heads bellowed in what sounded disconcertingly like triumph. The demon withdrew its other 5 heads, which dragged something about half its size from the ruined building. Is that a whale? Martinez blinked. Why would it leave an ocean full of whales if it just wanted dinner? Because that is not a whale. Thessa tilted her head to the left, then the right. It appears to be an enormous leg, covered in scales? With the limb clamped firmly between multiple jaws, the demon turned and retreated toward the open ocean. A voice in Thessa's comlink asked, Team leader, do we pursue? Ideally, she knew they should stop the demon from delivering the huge leg to whoever commanded it, but that wasn't feasible given their limited firepower. Negative. Refocus efforts on crowd control and mobilizing emergency services. Martinez looked relieved. So what now? We assess the damage, report back, and figure out who sent the demon and what they might want with that leg. She surveyed the wreckage of the Oceanic Institute and scowled. Clearly the mayor were in error, thinking the trawler stole a whale from the sea. The crew must have discovered that leg and brought it to the Institute, which in turn failed to properly notify the mayor authorities. Martinez wagged his index finger. No wonder Yamato was so reluctant to discuss the incident. Probably didn't want the mayor to claim the find as theirs. I wonder if it is. A massive human-like leg, but covered in scales? We need answers, which means her heart sank. Curse it to Hades. She pivoted and began jogging back to the conference center. She had a lot to accomplish quickly, including arranging an emergency flight to UNOSC headquarters. Martinez caught up to her, panting. What's wrong? I mean, besides the obvious. I must return home to consult with someone. She hesitated. My childhood home. Oh. He knew her well enough to understand the implication. I know that won't be easy, but given the circumstances, surely they'll be willing to talk to you, even though you're not their favorite person. That is a kind way to say I am dead to them. She sighed. Regardless, it must be done. One demon has wreaked havoc already, and others may follow. So who are you going to see? In the sea. His full lips quirked into a grin. She rolled her eyes at his attempted humor. An expert in ancient mare history and legend. My mother. And I will stop there. Thank you very much. And like I said, the anthology I think is coming out later this summer from eSpec Books. And I hope you enjoy it.
Oh, we're going to go see Mom. Okay.
Gotta go see the Mermaid Mom, yes.
Yeah, boy, that's going to be an interesting conversation. I can't wait to see the rest of this. That's very cool. Cool. Well, I had so much fun listening to this because I actually just went back and watched the original Godzilla movie, like the original Japanese version, before it was, softened for American audiences and all. I was getting all sorts of good vibes listening to this. Yeah. Do you call this a kaiju story, or are you thinking of it more as a, yeah, okay.
Yeah, this was my.
Yeah.
I am a huge fan of Godzilla, Gamera, Mothra. I love
All of them. I grew up on, yeah. Well, it's interesting to me because so many of the original kaiju stories, the kaiju itself had some sort of moral or ethical imperative or reason for doing something. Like the original Godzilla was very upset about the nuclear exposure, and in this case, you've sort of taken an interesting twist because it sounds like somebody else is holding the reins on this creature. So that very intriguing.
Yes. It was a lot of fun to write because the mythology I'm utilizing, which will come out soon, is actually Mesopotamian mythology.
Oh, cool.
And so the gods involved are from there, and the story involved, I was able to flex it a little bit to make it work with this character and in this anthology. So it was a lot of fun to do.
This already sounds like a character that you could do multiple stories with, and I don't know the end, but yeah, that could be really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I have, and this is about I think this is the fourth story I've done of the Bionic Mermaid. She's appeared in some other anthologies too.
Have I missed them all? Where have I been?
They're out there, and she's a lot of fun to write.
Yeah. Well, see, at least I had the right idea that's a great character to repeat. Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. Yeah. So what made you dream up this character in the first place? Did you like the folklore? Did you like what the character can do? What are you thinking about her powers?
Well, back for the original anthology, I'm trying to remember what the theme even was because it was years ago. But I came up with the idea. I was inspired by the dolphin. There was a dolphin, the case of a dolphin in the real world that had lost its tail to a propeller.
Oh, yeah.
And it had an artificial tail affixed to it. Mm-hmm. And then it could swim around with this artificial tail. So, being a person of a certain age, I was a huge fan of the $6 Million Man, the Bionic Woman. So I started thinking, what if this happened to a mermaid, but then she got a bionic tail put on and it gave her all these abilities, which she can convert the tail into legs. That's why she can walk.
Yeah.
But it also is very strong. She can, jump up real high. It gives her a lot of benefits. And so the first story is actually called The $6 Million Mermaid. And it's about how she winds up,
yes,
together.
We have the technology. Boink, boink, exactly. Boink. Yeah. Okay, well, Bonnie actually has a question for us on the same topic.
Oh, my cousin Bonnie. Hi, Bonnie.
Is this the same mermaid or a different one?
In each story, it's the same one. She's
okay.
The same. Yeah.
I wasn't sure. Yeah, that's cool.
Good question. Yeah.
That's cool. And Robatone remembered the incident. He says that was down in Florida, the dolphin. So
that's exactly right.
Huh? Okay.
Yep. That's the one. In fact, the glue that was made to affix his tail, I actually referenced that in my story. That's used as part of attaching because it's this. To say glue is an understatement of what it is, but this is expensive. So yeah,
some sticky organic kind of something or other. Yeah. Oh, I can just picture that. Yeah. Well, I'm kind of curious to know something from you as well with Space and Time magazine. We've had a lot of the other folks from the magazine on as well. Angela and Ryan and Gordon and Gary and such. So it's just a great publication that's been going on for so long, and you had such a strong presence with it for a dozen years. But when you were working with that, did you find that reading all those stories and interacting with them, did that influence what you write? Did that have any effect on you as a writer as well?
Well, it was certainly inspiring to see the great stories that came in, and so you can't help but learn from the other authors that are submitting to you and reading their stories and seeing their creative and different takes on things. During my run, one of the things we encouraged were for people to submit stories that were hybrids of some sort, science fiction with fantasy, horror with science fiction, whatever wacky blend you could come up with.
Yeah.
And they're just so darn creative. So yeah, it was very inspiring for sure. Learned a lot.
That's cool. I used to tell my Girl Scout troop when the kids were little, they would get some sort of creative thing for a project, and I would always make a point, you girls always take the same materials and do something different with it. And after a while, they would just like sit back and wait for the comment. They're like, Ms. Geisender, you always say that. It's like, well, you always do. So yeah. So that do you like that kind of effort, like a themed anthology or a particular direction? Release the Virgins? Yeah.
Yeah, that one was a fun one. That came out of that was actually out of a conversation at Balticon, I believe, where somebody made a comment about that line, and we came up from there with a whole anthology of stories that just had to include that line, Release the Virgins, in some way. But in answer to your question, yes, I really do enjoy writing to themed anthologies. It's almost like getting a writing challenge each time.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, okay, come up with a story for this, come up with a story for that. And some of them are, really obscure and unusual. There's one coming up that I'm going to be in from the folks at Crazy 8. It's a superhero one, which should be a lot of fun. But yeah, I actually really do enjoy that.
Yeah. So I'm curious to know, how does your brain work when you get a challenge like that, or you hear of an opportunity for a submission thing? What happens? Do you immediately set to it? Does it stew for a while? What happens with your brain?
Well, it depends on what it is. Some things come faster than others. Sometimes I gotta sit and noodle about it for quite a while. Like, what will fit? What makes sense for this? Especially if it's something really, really challenging. And sometimes the challenge is, does it have to be a science fiction story, a fantasy, horror, coming up with what genre will work best. So sometimes sometimes it'll take me a while to come up with some ideas, like the Baker Street Irregular series, which is the challenge was to take Sherlock Holmes and Watson and write alternative versions of them. And there were actually two separate anthologies. I had a story in each one. And certainly for that first one, it took me a while to think of, okay, what am I going to do with Sherlock that's different? So, yeah.
But still keep the flavor or whatever you're going to keep. Yeah. Yeah. It can't be really different.
And when it's based on a character that exists in the public domain like that, what I found helpful was rereading the actual Sherlock Holmes stories till I came across one that I realized if I made some adjustments, it would lend itself to what I came up with, which was actually Sherlock Holmes as a vampire.
Oh, all right. That's cool.
That was fun, yeah.
Well, that explains his lack of emotion in some ways. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. And he's always up till the middle of the night playing his violin. Okay, I can see this. Yeah.
It worked remarkably well, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, you're a pretty smart lady. Yeah. Cool. Well, we have one more question from Bonnie here, who wants to know, how do you structure your stories?
Oh, that's a good question. How do I structure them? The first time I write through a story, I tend to just word vomit onto the pages. My problem is, for short stories, I tend to write very long, and then I have to pare it down in editing. So, yeah, I try not to, one of the things for and anyone who, I'm sure Oliver can back me up on this, anyone who's been an editor and a writer, the challenge is turning off editor brain and just write, and not just keep, restructuring your first sentence and fixing everything that's wrong.
Yes.
So I try to turn that off and just write as I see the story in my head. And then when I get to the end, I look at it and say, okay, well, it was supposed to be 5,000 words. It's 8,000, time to trim. And then I go through and I slice it down and slice it down. Okay, I don't need this. This paragraph doesn't add anything. This subplot doesn't add anything until I get to where I have to be.
Right. Right. And then I frequently find that the starting point of the story is not where I started. It's like 2 pages later, usually, because all that backstory, get rid of it. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah. Well, but I believe in that. I'm a big believer that you can't edit what's not on the page, so you got to get it down.
Yeah.
Do you ever use dictation or do you type? How do you do it?
I type. One of the best things my mother ever taught me was to type very young. So, and she was very good at it, and I became quite good at it. So I'm very fast, especially nowadays with laptops and computers and such. So for me, it's just plowing through typing.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. Well, that's a remarkable skill and it comes in handy. I never actually learned to touch type, and so it's just annoying. Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I like dictation, I think.
Yeah, good reason.
I can talk fast. Yeah. But this has been so much fun, and it's so nice to see you because I haven't seen you in so long. I mean, we've been at cons, we've been on panels together and all this stuff. So it's great to see your face. It's really neat.
Thank you. You too. I do. I miss everyone. I see a lot of people who are out there in the audience, and hi, I miss you all.
Yes.
Someday we'll see each other again in person.
Yes, and you have lots of great comments, as did all of our readers, about how much they enjoyed the story going along in there. So that's fun. That's fun.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, but it's so much fun to see you, and it's fun to see everybody together. So I think this would be a great time. Let's ask all the other writers to come back, and we can all be on together. So Jim, if you could bring everybody back, that'd be nifty. There we go. There's Chuck, Loretta, Oliver,
Hello.
James Chambers. Yay. Well, thank you so much, everybody. This has been so much fun to hear all these great stories. I was a little tired this afternoon, but now I'm like wide awake. I may not sleep.
No, it's been great, and the readings have been wonderful. Thank you all for sharing your stories. Why don't we just do a quick roundup of what you have coming up next, what we should look out for from you in the future. And if you didn't get a chance to tell us where we can find you online, let's do that too. And maybe we'll just swing back around to Chuck.
Okay. As I mentioned, currently working on a short story collection, Sticks and Stones. I'll be posting some information this summer. The cover artwork is in, and I am working with someone else to do the lettering on the cover, and working with an artist that I've been a big fan of their stuff for a number of years. As for finding me online, I'm most active on Facebook. There's a CW Briar and a CW Briar-author. That one's just, big news. I have a lot more fun on just CW Briar, so you can find me there. But I'm also on Twitter and Instagram as well, and cwbriar.com.
Cool.
Great. Loretta, how about you?
I'm working on that graphic novel series, and I have gotten, I'm going to call it the logo for it, and I'm working on the third in the number of stories. The first one is the one that I read tonight. I'm at this point not sure if I want to even what kind of website I want to do, and I have yet to use Twitter. I have a Facebook page, which I almost never use either. Mm-hmm. All that to say that I'll probably be using Facebook more. Twitter's making me a little nervous, and so I'm not even sure why. It just must be some sort of weird sixth sense about it. I'm really thinking about doing more readings like this, mostly because I really do miss humans. The whole thing about the electronic meeting of people is useful, but I want to start to see faces. All right.
Yeah. And Loretta, you have another story out recently also in Black Girl Magic Literary Magazine. It's a zine. Your short story is Donuts in there, right?
Yeah. It's a combination of vampire police procedural.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I like those words glued together. That's really cool.
Yeah. Well, I live in New York, so we have a lot of vampire police.
Yes, it's important.
Loretta, is that online, that story, or
yeah, it is. It's you can just go onto Black Girl Magic and they put this really cute graphic with it. I think it looks really funny. It's like somebody's trying to eat his own face.
All right. And Oliver, what will you be getting up to while you remain in our dimension?
Well, I think I just have something to put on the bucket list. I'm making somebody eat his own face, so now I'm just hungry. But writing some more poems. I just tried to put together a found footage story.
Oh, yeah.
And let's see what else. I'm going to be doing a East Village poet by the name of Galinsky just sent me an invitation to reinterpret his poem Five Fights. So we'll be putting together, it's going to be done at a well-known online, but through a well-known downtown performance venue called Franklin Furnace. And
Very cool.
so basically, it's going to be a video interpretation of his poem Five Fights. And since I do martial arts, I've convinced my martial arts instructor to be in the video with me. So we're going to be working on that. I should mention that story, which, if anybody knows the original story, they know how cobbled together I read tonight. That's surprise, surprise, not the whole story. But it was in Goodreads Best Short Stories 2019, which is now, besides ebook, it's now available on Audible. So somebody is reading that story in a voice that doesn't sound like mine.
Terrifying.
I know.
Yeah. And yet intriguing. Yeah. So Jim, how about you? What do you have coming up?
Oh, well, let's check in with Hildy before we.
I was just talking to Hildy, and I'm thinking,
Talk to me. I'm done.
no. Thank you, Jim, for saving my butt. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the new anthology.
The new anthology, so the story I read tonight will be coming out from eSpec Books. You can find them at eSpec.wordpress.com. The anthology is from John French, and it's called Devilish and Divine. So it's stories that involve either something sort of angelic or something demonic.
Very cool.
Guess which one I chose? Surprise. Right now, if you want to find one of my stories, the latest one out is in this, Badass Moms. There we go. From Crazy 8 Press, crazy8.com. So that one's out. Mary Fan is the editor of that. My story is about the mother of a zombie called Raising the Dead. And that was
great.
That was a lot longer, right? And then the next thing, again, will be with Crazy 8 Press, and that's going to be the anthology. It's a superhero-based world. It's going to be all the authors. We're writing an integrated stories. They're all going to be kind of related. I'm co-writing with Russ Colshamiro. Other authors in there will be Peter David, Robert Greenberger, Paul Kupperberg, a bunch of other great people. So, check that out when it comes. I think that'll be out. I think they're aiming for sometime in the winter months.
Excellent. That's exciting.
That should be fun, yeah.
What's that?
I said, yeah, it should be fun.
Oh, okay.
Yes, they do. And I'm sorry, I just saw Robert on the side asked if it's open for subs. I don't think so. I think it's a closed call on that one. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing it come out, though. That sounds fun.
Yes, definitely.
It should be, yeah.
Excellent. And Carol, what have you got on the front burner?
I have a short story coming out in a really great anthology called Under Twin Suns, which is Robert Chambers' anthology of alternate tales from his histories. But Jim, you can talk a little bit about this because you are the handsome and talented editor of said anthology. So.
Well, I just happen to have the cover handy.
So
for a second.
Coincidentally.
Yeah.
So Under Twin Suns, Alternate Histories of the Yellow Sign. Coming from Hippocampus Press at the end of June. It's available for pre-order now. And this is an anthology of stories inspired by the King in Yellow mythos of Robert W. Chambers, particularly in two stories called The Repairer of Reputations and The Yellow Sign. And lots of fun to edit that. That's coming up this summer. Great authors in that: John Langan, Kevin Warren, Tim Wagner, Lisa Morton, Carol Geisander, of course, and plenty of other good stuff in there. So, but that's about it. All right. Well, look, this has been terrific. I'm sure everyone enjoyed the stories, and we appreciate you reading with us and taking the time to be on Galactic Terrors. A couple of quick items for our audience. The obligatory please subscribe below to follow future Galactic Terrors transmissions. They say like and subscribe really helps us keep this YouTube thing afloat. Apparently they're on very shaky financial ground and have no user base, and really need you to like and subscribe our videos so that YouTube can stay in business. If you'd like to keep on top of these things without liking and subscribing, we also have a newsletter, and you can check that out and subscribe to that. Carol does a great job sending that out every so often, just a couple of times a month, to remind you who's reading and when we're reading. We read the second Thursday of the month every month. Our next reading will be coming up on June 10th. And Carol, I think we have a couple of people already on board for that.
We do. We have Robatone from our New York chapter will be reading, and also Michelle Renee Lane, who received a Stoker Award nomination for her debut novel, Invisible Chains, just a few years ago. She's going to come and read with us, and we'll have a couple more readers to announce as time comes along. We can't reveal everything right now. So no, I'm looking forward to that. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so we hope to see you all next month back here on Galactic Terrors. And just one last bit of news. One of our local HWA NY chapter members, Randy Dawn, is launching an all-new in-person reading series that starts up, I think, later this month. It's called Rooftop Readings at Ample Hills Ice Cream. And if you are interested, you can check out their info on Twitter. And I'll put the Facebook link up in a second. And it's basically outdoor readings at an ice cream shop. So it's who knows what will happen with a bunch of horror authors or other imaginative authors all hopped up on sugar for an hour and a half.
What could go wrong?
Seriously, on a rooftop, really? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that one's always on the third Tuesdays, I believe, and it's a small admission price, but that gets you a really cool dish of ice cream as well. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Ice cream, author readings, outdoors in Brooklyn. So lots to look forward to there. All right. For more information about the HWA NY, visit our website, hwany.org. We post a lot of information there, member news and other things. And of course, if you're interested in the Horror Writers Association, you can check out horror.org. So any final words before we call it a wrap?
No, just thanks again for having me. Really appreciate it. I enjoyed everyone's stories, and it was a lot of fun. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for hosting us. I love the story samples. It was great.
Yeah, thanks to everyone.
Yeah,
And tentacles. That's all I have to say.
And we look forward to hearing about that hand, Oliver. So I want to know if the hand, has a story of its own. So yeah.
Oh, I happen to know the guy's name. His name is Lefty.
Carol, you're not supposed to give these things away. So
sorry, I forgot. Yeah.
Hey, Carol, we'll see you in dreams.
Yeah. Ooh,
and on that note, have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
everyone.